Good evening and welcome to this edition of the ParaNet Continuum. My guest tonight is a journalist from the Los Angeles area. He's published 2 books on the shadowy world of mind control and the CIA. His latest book is Virtual Government, CIA Mind Control Operations in America. It's my pleasure to welcome him tonight to the program, Alex Constantine. And with that, good evening, Alex, and welcome to the program.
Well, how do you do? It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you for being there. I've read this book, not completely cover to cover, but this is a very, very fascinating work.
Yeah, you didn't know it existed until 2 days ago.
I know. It's incredible. I'm supposed to know these things. But anyway, before we get into this, kind of give us just kind of a condensation of what this book is about.
Well, the idea of the book was to expose as many CIA mind control fronts as possible between 2 covers. At least that was my intention when I set out. What I found is that I had a lot of explaining to do because the American public in general is not real up to date on the interactions of fascist governments around the world and how they interact and how they influence what happens in the United States. So I did something called a preamble in the beginning to sort of run all that down and explain how the foundation got here for mind-influencing technology and so forth.
Okay.
And then I get into mass mind control. So the first chapter is about the media, because back in 1947, Allen Dulles conceived something called Operation Mockingbird, which was conceived specifically as a mass mind control operation. And the CIA at that point begins to take over the media, co-opting national publications and regional newspapers and the like. They got into the works of major newspapers around the country, and by the mid-'70s, you find, according to the Church Committee, that there were at least 600 to 800 reporters being paid by the CIA working in the American media. So then I move on from there to individual mind control experiments on children, CIA mind control operations, because the experimentation ends about 1963, and MKUltra, as it was known, becomes operational, and we've been living with it ever since.
Okay, well, that's all very, very interesting. During this segment, I want to kind of explore, first of all, personally, how did you get involved in this kind of research? Because I know that your forte is reporting, right?
Yes, it is.
How did you get involved in this?
Well, at the time, now, if we go back about 10 years, I was doing television and movie reviews, that sort of thing, for an alternative paper here in L.A. Called the L.A. Weekly. And I was doing some spot work here and there in the press, and I went up to San Francisco to cover a murder trial because I had begun in Ohio working on hard crime cases, and that's really where my heart lay.
Uh-huh.
So I attended a trial of a homeless person who was murdered up there by the name of John Doe 60, at least. That's how he's referred to in the coroner's files. I don't think he's ever been identified, but he was picked up one night by 2 Satanists in San Francisco, and they drugged him and they chained him down. They proceeded to carve on his body, and they ate parts of his body and so forth. And I grabbed the key witness in this case because I was so concerned and a little bit worked up over this, about the gruesomeness of this murder.
Uh-huh.
So I spent 3 days interrogating the main witness in the case, and I discovered that these 2 characters had ties to some wealthy people in the San Francisco area. And also there was evidence of links to the CIA and the defense establishment up in San Francisco. So my head, I came away from that case with a lot of questions, and I guess I've been answering those questions ever since.
So that's how basically you got involved in this research.
Yes. That led me into mind control, and you may have heard of Mae Brussel.
Yes.
She was possibly the country's best conspiracy researcher. She studied fascism beginning immediately after the assassination of John Kennedy, and she had a program up in Monterey, California, and she died in 1988 of a very fast-working cancer. And at that point, I went to speak to the producer because I had information on Satanism, which was a subject she was just getting into. And the United States satanic cults very often are set up as mind control fronts or cutouts for the CIA, and they perform various functions from drug dealing to assassinations. So I began to hammer away on that point I was on this radio program that began shortly after Mae Brussel died. So I've been in it journalistically ever since.
Okay. Now, Alex, during the next 2 hours tonight, we're going to cover a lot of this material, a lot of the territory. Right. The thing I want to do is I want to kind of take this in stages. I think it's very important to kind of build this from the beginning. Where did you find in your research, where did all of this start, or where did it have its roots?
Well, let's see. We can. That's a very good question. I mean, I consider myself not a conspiracy researcher, but a researcher of fascism after World War II. So, you know, where does this begin? Well, if you go back to Nazi Germany, you'll find mass mind control, you'll find experimentation, crude experimentation with drug and hypnosis and so forth. But mind control is just a part of the package. If we back up to the 1920s then, we find fascism emerging in the United States and in Germany and in Italy and other countries around the world as a response to communism, because the people in power feared that they would lose their wealth and privilege if communism took hold. So fascism was born as a response to communism. You may remember that World War I was called off because the Germans had to go back home and put down a German uprising, and that's sort of the point where fascism begins in the 20th century. So that's the subject I cover, and mind control is just a part of the package. So if your question is how did I become, or where does mind control begin? Well, in the United States, I think the beginning is the National Security Act of 1947, and the decision of the CIA to create what they called a Manchurian candidate, which was something like a zombie that can have its memories wiped out, and therefore they can set it to do any operation they desire, pull off the perfect crime.
Okay, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll start getting into that aspect of it, because this is very fascinating. The book is The Virtual Government, CIA Mind Control Operations in America. My guest is Alex Constantine. We're going to be talking about this and much more. This is a very, very murky, dirty thing that's been going on for quite some time. So, okay, anyway, we're going to be talking again, as I mentioned earlier, about this book, Virtual Government, the CIA Mind Control Operations in America. And while we're getting the guests back on the line, I want to mention that a lot of this stuff kind of butts up to the stuff that we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks concerning, for example, Project Silverbug, concerning the so-called Nazi research into flying discs, and of course some of the stuff that happened when we brought the Nazi scientists and doctors over here from Germany under Operation Paperclip. Have we got Alex back? Okay. Okay, Alex, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's pick up where we left off during the first segment. Let's start talking about the this thing that was going on in Nazi Germany, or how it led up to get over here.
Well, we had it going actually since the 1920s. The U.S. military had played around with hypnosis as a form of mind control. They were hoping to develop it as a covert weapon of war, and they had some success with it. And in the technology field too, if you go back to the 1920s, according to an issue of Popular Mechanics that I have here, there was a doctor by the name of Casimili who had some success with transmitting noises to the human brain by setting up a system of oscillators and transmitters and so forth, looking for the brain's frequency. And he managed to cause clicking sounds in the auditory tracts of some of his subjects. So that's where you find some experimentation, various ends of this field, up to the present time, and it really goes back a lot farther than the creation of MKUltra.
What was the purpose or the goal that these guys were trying to accomplish by being able to do this?
Well, the foremost item on the agenda of MKUltra, like I said, was the creation of a Manchurian candidate, and this was an assassin who could be programmed to go out into the field and pull off the assassination, receive a trigger that would entirely wipe out his memory, and like I said, that's the perfect crime. You can once you do that, you can get away with just about anything. And I think I mentioned earlier that they perfected an electronic method called electronic dissolution of memory that was perfected by 1960, and then of course the first so-called alien abduction takes place, And that's because once they had that capability of wiping out the memory, they could do pretty much with experimental subjects anything that they wanted. And of course, they could use hypnosis and various other means in the present, including virtual reality, to replace lost memories with memories that the CIA desires to leave the subject with. And of course, then the subjects go around talking about aliens. Well, in the 60s, this was done with hypnosis, and they had other electronic processes to facilitate that process.
Wow. Now, before we get into this, I want to say one thing. I've myself reading your book today. I can't tell you how many times I've fallen out of my chair.
You don't know how many times you've heard this.
Because I'll tell you why. And this is what I want to cover, basically, is this is really, I think it's very bizarre, but I think it's very significant. The people that, for example, the audience that listens to this program mostly are interested in, matters of the paranormal, UFOs, and that type of thing. The one thing that I have found reading your book is that there is a uncanny connection between a lot of the names of the people that are the movers and shakers, if you will, of the UFO movement over the last 40, 50 years.
Yeah, that's true.
And these people pop up in your research as people that have been engineering this mind control scenario and other nasty and nefarious things.
You'll find that many of the spokesmen who are out there driving in that alien cover story have a dual role because they're either involved in advanced technology or very deeply involved in the intelligence field. And as far as I'm concerned, there is no innocence in the intelligence field.
I agree.
So you have these people beating the drum. Every time you turn on the television, it's aliens. And you tell me how many other classified programs in the Pentagon you can find on television every time you turn the damn thing on.
I know what you mean.
They want us to believe this. This is the mass mind control I was talking about in the beginning. And if you go back and look at the minutes of the Robertson Committee, which was the first committee set up by Dr. Robertson, who was a CIA operative, those minutes read a lot more like how do we cover this entire thing up than how do we deal with the problem of UFOs, because there was no problem, and we could run down the history of the UFOs if you want to. It's all out there.
Okay, I want to do that. Because, again, this I think is very significant. Because a lot of people today, and I mean, over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about this on the program. We've been talking about, number one, the declassification of the Project Silverbug document, for one thing. I'm sure you probably know about that.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Well, 1955, ATIC, which was Wright-Patterson out there, was involved in the creation of a disk that was taken, I believe, from Nazi technology.
Yes.
That could attain, according to this document, it could attain a speed of 2,300 miles an hour.
Yeah, they could do about 5 times the speed of sound in the early 50s.
Yeah, and at an altitude of 70,000 feet.
Yeah, there was a reporting about this time down in Mexico where a whole collection of discs spelled out the word Pepsi in the sky.
Yeah, I read that too. And
yes.
The other thing that I think that a lot of people will be shocked to hear is what are Foo Fighters?
Well, let's start right there then.
Okay.
You had a German official who most people have never heard of. His name was Hans Kammler. And he and some of his staff had built Auschwitz, and of course Auschwitz was used for medical experimentation. But Hans Kammler had set up operations during World War II in Poland, and he was overseen by Albert Speer, who of course survived World War II and went on to become fabulously wealthy.
Uh-huh.
Well, among the advanced technology projects that they were working on was something called the Foo Fighter, which was a television controlled, that is TV waves, controlled flight vehicle that was not manned. It was strictly remote controlled.
Uh-huh.
It had a television camera outfitted on the front, and inside of it there was a generator that could knock out airplane ignition systems. So if this thing came flying within 100 yards, bombers heading for Berlin, say, their ignitions would be knocked out and they would crash. So what is the one thing you keep hearing about UFOs to the present day? When they get over a house or they get over a car, they knock out the ignition. So they still have that capability.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happened is at the end of World War II, there's chaos because the Russians are advancing, the British and the Americans are advancing. It's pretty much everybody's grabbing what they can from the Nazis. Now, the British went to the Harz Mountains, and they found a base there that was built underground where these Foo Fighters were being made. They confiscated the plans and some of the prototypes. They take it back to England, and they didn't give it to the United States because the United States had the atomic secret, and England wanted it. So they had to have something that they could barter for the atomic bomb. So they went to work on these Foo Fighters. They put the thing in a wind tunnel, and they played around with various configurations. And the first thing that they started with was a basic aerodynamic wing design. Then they brought the wings back pretty much to the delta shape. As a matter of fact, there's a Paperclip scientist who is credited with creating the delta wing. His name is Alexander Lippisch.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you right there, Alex.
Yes.
Hold that thought, because when we come back, we'll continue that. My guest tonight is very interesting Alex Constantine. His book is Virtual Government, CIA Mind Control Operations in America. And, of course, this book is published by Feral House and is available in all bookstores. And I encourage you to pick up a copy. And, of course, one thing I want to mention, too, before I go back to Alex, is that his previous book is called Psychic Dictatorship in the USA, and it was kind of a precursor to the virtual government, and was also quite interesting as well. Now, Alex, when we went to break, we were talking about the Foo Fighters and what was going on over there. Go ahead and continue with that.
Right. First of all, as regards Psychic Dictatorship, I think it's interesting that the very first copy was ordered by Chris Carter, the producer of the X-Files.
Are you serious?
Yes. And you'll see the similarities between the two, which is why if you look at the cover of Virtual Government, I took his lettering. That's the X-Files lettering.
Right, okay. Sure.
So we're just saying hello to each other. In fact, Mulder goes around sometimes quoting from Psychic Dictatorship. So.
Really? That's interesting.
So if you like the X-Files, you'll like Psychic Dictatorship.
Okay, that's good.
That's I wanted to get that out of the way. Now, what was the question again?
Okay, we were talking about the Foo Fighters. Now,
yeah, okay.
The reason I want to say this is because, you know, I myself was not aware, and according to what you found, our government knew what these were.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, you'll find, if you go back and read the books in Operation Paperclip, you'll find the personnel who rounded up the Nazis and brought their technology back to the United States became very highly placed. That means lieutenants who were involved in finding the Nazis and their science ended up running the National Security Agency and various government functions of that sort. But to return to to England, where the first tests were conducted, they brought back the Foo Fighter. They played around with the Delta wing in the air tunnel, and what they found is that as they brought the wings back, they could increase velocity of the vehicle. So one of their scientists hit on the idea of wrapping the wings all the way around so that they had a saucer shape, and they tried it again, and they were happy with the results that they had, but they still weren't good enough. Now, if you look at, and I'll explain why, if you look at a standard airfoil configuration, if you remember from your high school science, there's about an inch of drag on the wing that's created by friction of air that builds up around the wing.
Right.
So you have this inch of drag that's slowing the whole vehicle down. Well, in a conventional jet design, you have suction in the front of the vehicle, and it's blasted out the back.
Okay.
So one of their scientists hit on the idea, what instead of for intake, what if we modify the suction design so that we put little pinholes all over the craft, the air is sucked in from all over to eliminate the drag on the vehicle, and then blast it out, say out the back or even out the front or out the bottom. So they tried that, and they had amazing results with it.
Wow.
So at this point, now this is 2 years after World War II, about 1947, they call up Rockefeller. Now if you look at the biographies of Lawrence Rockefeller, you'll find out that this man was obsessed with airplanes. His funding started McDonnell Douglas. He owned pieces of 15 different aerospace companies, and these have become major corporations. And
of course we know, too, according to what you've got in here, and of course we know this as well, that Lawrence Rockefeller is a major benefactor of some of these kooky UFO...
In fact, almost all of them.
Right, okay.
He's paying money to these so-called experts on the alien invasion who are out there beating that drum to drive it into our heads, and at the same time, as I mentioned, they're working on the same technology, which is why all these guys have backgrounds in advanced design for the Pentagon, worked on classified projects and so forth. Even Ed Dames, who was working with what he called boxes in the sky that can peer through buildings. This is classified technology, and we'll get into this in a little bit.
Okay. Now,
so Lawrence Rockefeller flies over there and takes a tour of their facilities, takes a look at the Nazi projects, and sees this saucer and just about flips, right? So he sets up a secret base up in the wilderness in Canada, and that's why the very first overflights of UFOs are in Seattle or in the Washington area.
Right, right.
And who's there at the time to find these things when they crash? People like Clay Shaw.
Now,
right?
yeah.
Involved with the Kennedy assassination.
Now, Clay Shaw, as some people may or may not know, Clay Shaw was one of the fellows that, he was actually, I think, the only person that was ever indicted or brought to charges concerning the Kennedy assassination.
He is the antagonist in Oliver Stone's JFK.
Okay.
And there were two scientists from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base who were on the outside of this whole project. They went up to investigate, and on the way back, the gas line clogged and their airplane blew up. And according to the investigation, not according to me, but according to the investigators of that crash, it was sabotage.
Now, this is the Maury Island incident.
I believe so, yeah.
You know, this is another thing that's interesting. The fellow, Fred Lee Chrisman?
Fred Lee Chrisman was another who was associated with Clay Shaw.
He was the guy that was in the boat with the one that recovered the material that came out of the UFO that was hovering over the water there.
Well, the interesting thing about both these characters is that they were involved in rounding up the Nazi prototypes and plans.
And as you mentioned, too, Chrisman was also involved in security work or handling security work for the aerospace firms.
Exactly.
This is just totally bizarre.
It's bizarre, but what you have to go back and cut through all the disinformation that the government has put out there. Now, I know now we're talking mind control now because that is the crux of the matter here. And, you know, to take some of the subjects that are covered on your program, those subjects happen to cover various categories of mind control experimentation.
Okay.
Let me give you an example.
Sure.
Down in Florida, there's an entire high school that has seen this ghostly marching band, you know, just marching up and down the halls. They could even hear the music.
Okay.
Now, this is the entire high school. This isn't one student.
Right.
The vice principal opens up a set of bay windows on the second floor, and a big ball of light comes floating through the window.
Okay.
Well, that wasn't an angel, right? That was a ball of plasma. If you've ever seen those globes, you touch them and the plasma goes to where your finger is on the globe.
Right.
That's the very same thing. But the Pentagon has some classified technology. Some of it's a little more advanced than what you're aware of. Some of it is very highly advanced and is some 30 or 40 years ahead of the most sophisticated technology that you're aware of.
Okay. Alex, hold that right there.
All right.
When we come back, we'll get into that, too, some more about... I want to find out what the connection is between mind control and the UFO thing and all of this bizarre stuff, and, of course, the occult, which is a big major player in a lot of this stuff with these people.
Now, we can explain how all this happened.
Okay, we're going to get to that in just a moment. My guest is Alex Constantine. The book is Virtual Government. My guest is Alex Constantine. We're talking about virtual government, and, of course, we're you know, this program is 2 hours tonight. Locally, we have 1 hour coming up with Alex continuing. But, you know, this is incredible stuff that you've dug up here, Alex. And, you know, I think, you know, one of the things that I know some of the people out there in the audience are probably sharply divided. Some believe that, you know, that there's aliens. I'm not really so sure that there are. But, you know, I say this, that, you know, there's precedence. There's actually data to prove what you're saying in the form of documentation and that type of thing. But what you were mentioning earlier about, you know, the Robertson panel and all of that, I had the rare privilege of having access to Edward Ruppelt's private papers for some time. And one of the things that we discovered was that he was talking about the NSA clear back in, you know, in the early 50s, before anybody even knew what the NSA was. And the thing that I found really interesting, and I've talked about this before, is that Ruppelt was told by an intelligence agent that the Washington National sightings that occurred in July of '52 were going to happen. Do you have a comment about that?
Now, you're talking 1952. At this time, Newsweek was running pictures of flying saucers that the military had developed.
Right.
I have a copy of Newsweek from 1950 with a photograph. So they hadn't arrived at the cover story at this time. And after the Washington overflight, the general came out, said pretty much it's classified business and it's none of your business.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. As a researcher yourself and, not necessarily interested so much in the UFO phenomena, but I think that there's probably a strong possibility that somewhere in all of this foray is Roswell.
Yes, Roswell fits in here.
In what way?
Well, it's pretty much worked up as a propaganda coup. In fact, the last book, well-known book on Roswell, was written by a man named Philip Corso,
right,
who has a pretty incredible history of interaction not only with the intelligence community, but with neo-Nazi groups in the United States. Now, he belonged to a secret society in New York called the Shikshinny Knights of Malta. That was pretty much patterned after the military order that serves the Vatican.
Uh-huh.
Now, the Shikshinny Knights of Malta was run by a man by the name of General Charles Willoughby, who was the head of MacArthur's intelligence in Korea. And Willoughby's name wasn't Willoughby, it was Wiedenbach, and he was an SS officer who was brought over here from Nazi Germany and became MacArthur's chief of intelligence.
That's incredible.
Now, it was Willoughby's disinformation to United States newspapers, especially the New York Times, that dragged us into the Korean War. And it's no different than the Vietnam War. The head of the Plans Division during the Vietnam War was a man by the name of Kramer, Fritz Kramer, another German who was brought over here and was the head of plans during the Vietnam War.
Do you think that anything happened in the desert in July 47, like perhaps maybe one of these experimental craft with human beings aboard? Is that a possibility?
It's a possibility. I have several, I can break it down to several different variations. All I can say is that at this point, all you can do is explain it theoretically, but foremost, I look at it as a propaganda effort to explain these UFOs, because they're out there. Everybody's seeing them. So
the reason that they'd want to explain the UFOs is to conceal their actual research. Actually, people were seeing things.
Yes.
But they're using these cover stories to make people turn off the subject, basically.
Well, you have phases of development. You have the early experimental phase before the cover story.
Uh-huh.
And then, they're explaining it as classified stuff. The public doesn't have to know about this. Just mind your own business. And then the Robertson Committee comes along. And about this time that they create the alien cover story, and suddenly the motion picture industry is pumping out these alien movies. Now the thing is, they're out there. They're not concealed. They're concealed in plain sight. So somehow you have to explain them.
Now let me ask you this: how does the occult figure into this? Because I know that again.
Jump.
How does the occult figure into this?
Okay, let's back up now. We've got MKUltra in the 1950s, and as I mentioned, CIA mind control becomes operational in the mid-60s.
Okay.
And there's also an important transition that takes place about this time. Just to give you an example, there was a man by the name of Jim Jones who was working for the CIA way back in the early 60s.
This is the People Temple guy, right?
People's Temple guy.
Right.
Well, the CIA gives him the results of their experimentation in 120 different sub-projects and tells Jim Jones, we want you to take this out and play with it in the field. See what you can do with it. Right?
Okay.
So he takes all this information. He spends a year down in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, with Joseph Mengele before he even begins his People's Temple.
Mengele?
Yes.
Jim Jones with Mengele?
Yeah, with Mengele. They both arrive there at the same time and leave at the same time.
Interesting. Okay, continue.
Lived in the same area. So what I'm saying is that this isn't proven, but there's strong evidence to suggest this.
Okay.
And I probably should have made that clarification.
Well, that's fine. Go ahead.
So then, and then you get to French Guiana, where you have the People's Temple moved to a concentration camp. Basically, People's Temple was comprised of mental patients who were taken out of, up in Sausalito, they were taken out of a mental institution by order of Governor Reagan. who wants to close down the mental institution and put those people on the street. And that's where they are today, by the way, here in California. Now, many of those people. So these mental patients are told, you can be free of the hospital, and we'll even give you a free house because guess what? Jim Jones is the housing authority in San Francisco. So we'll give you a free house if you join the People's Temple.
Oh, boy.
These people jump at the chance. The entire mental institution is closed down, and all the patients now are followers of Jim Jones.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, and the rest is history, but there's a lot of this history that isn't well known.
Okay.
For one thing, that concentration camp in French Guiana was sitting on land leased by an attorney for I.G. Farben, better known as the Auschwitz people, because they owned Auschwitz and the rubber plant behind it. And one of the supervisors in that rubber plant is now the Pope. So you find very interesting connections in all of this, and everywhere you look, as you connect these dots, you find old guard Nazis.
You said the Pope, as in the Catholic Pope?
Yes, his name is Karol Wojtyla. He's now the Pope.
Oh, boy.
If you remember, during the Vatican banking scandal, when $11-12 million disappeared, he called in 4 people to investigate the theft of those funds, and one of them was a Nazi banker during World War II.
Okay, Alex, we've got to go to another break. When we come back, we're going to wrap up the first hour. I'll get a closing comment for you on that.
I'd like to answer your question.
Okay, well, good. Thank you. Hold on. And we're in the last stretch of the first hour with my guest, Alex Constantine. The book is Virtual Government. Alex was going to answer my question when we come back from this break, so go ahead, Alex.
Right. Now, when those people at Jonestown died, we go back to Albert Speer because he crops up again all of a sudden. And he tells reporters that Odessa is taking over the United States. Odessa is the organization of retired SS officers. So now you have the influence of Nazi Germany in the United States because all those Nazis were brought over. According to the Washington Post, a total of 5,000 Nazis and East European Quislings arrived in the United States as a result of that migration. So we have MKUltra, which includes German scientists and American fascists who are in the psychiatric community involved in mind control experimentation. And then around 1963, people start to wake up that the CIA is doing these things. So now the CIA has a difficult problem, and you can almost understand the problem that they had. If they stay on campus where most of these experiments were being conducted, sooner or later they'd be flushed out by the press. There were even congressmen asking questions. So what was the solution? The solution was to set up religious organizations and co-opt existing mind control cults, right? Some of them already being with a strong influence of Nazi Germany involved, and use the followers in those cults as mind control subjects. And very often at the ends of these operations, they end up, quote, suiciding again and again and again.
And so that's kind of where we get the connection to the occult.
Yes, absolutely. Now, there were 2 members in Rancho Santa Fe, just as an example, that were part of this UFO cult.
Heaven's Gate?
Yeah, who were associated with Jim Jones when he was up in San Francisco. That was Bo and Peep.
Right.
You may remember them.
Yes, yes.
Well, in San Francisco, they're pretty well, people recall them.
Okay, that's going to wrap it up for us for this first hour, Alex. We'll have to cut it off there, but what I want to do is we'll carry this on to the next hour, and we'll talk about the aspect of the mind control and get into the guts of that, because we didn't even get to touch that this first hour. But
right.
We'll have to have you back, too, as well, because this has been very interesting. And
well, it's a general overview, that's all.
Yeah, there's a lot of material here. Okay, well, anyway, thank you very much for being on the program. Again, that was Alex Constantine. The book is Virtual Government, CIA Mind Control Operations in America. Get a copy of this and check it out. It's quite incredible.